Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. Hopefully this works, and hopefully we're live. Who knows? Who knows?
It's hard to tell with StreamYard.
I don't know. I don't know. For everyone who's watching, I'm Stephen Arian, and my guest this evening is Michelle Schusterman.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about some topics that I'd pulled together that we wanted to talk about. But equally, if there's anything you want to ask us, post comments, questions in the comment section, and I'll pull them up later and we'll get round to them. We're going to run for about an hour, see how long I last, because I'm still coughing from COVID. Hooray! But anyway, if I mute myself, it's because I'm having a nice coughing fit. So the first thing we're going to talk about was, Michelle didn't know about this, so I sent it to her. The Wired article / hit piece that someone had done on Brandon Sanderson. But more than just talking about it specifically, I also wanted to talk about like the larger repercussions and other things, and what we think about it. So you hadn't heard about this, and you've now read the article. What did you think of it?
I just kept thinking, I kept cringing because it was like, I can't believe this guy spent so much time in person with Brandon and was invited into his home.
Yeah.
And had such things to say, not only about him, but about his family and his fans. Like how it just seemed so uncalled for. You know, like, man, I don't know, it was like the writer was looking for I don't know what he was looking for, with this story of Brandon. Like, and I do think there is like something in us as humans where when somebody reaches a certain level of success, it's like we have to point out all the reasons why they don't deserve it, or it shouldn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if they do. And we can get into that too, because he had some very unkind things to say about Brandon's writing, and I have some thoughts. That's all.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. The biggest thing that I came away from it was that if this was an attempt at a hit piece, it was so rambly and so vague and so peculiar that it failed. Like, as you said, he was trying to look for dirt upon him to then somehow besmirch his career or stop his career dead in its tracks. But equally, it's like, if you understand how big of a juggernaut he is in the industry, nothing short of something terrible was going to make anything. And this guy just waffled on, and his comments was, he's a bit boring. That's the long and short of all he could come up with.
And why, and how is that even a bad thing? Like, thank God he's not controversial. We have enough terrible authors as humans in the industry already. Like, people who their success makes me sigh or forlorn because they're not good people. And like, it's okay that I wouldn't even say boring is the right word. Is it boring to love your family and love writing and turn out a lot of books that make people happy? That sounds like a pretty awesome life to me. Like, what's boring? When you say boring, do you really just mean not controversial?
Yeah.
And why do you want him to be controversial? Like, we don't want that. Oh God, I don't know.
No, it's like you said, there's enough people in the industry and in publishing that keep popping up and things happen, and you're like, oh no.
Not you.
Stories emerge and everyone goes, yeah, we already knew that in the industry.
Right.
And fans were like, what did you mean? But behind the scenes, everybody already knew. And it's just kind of these things but yeah, if that's the worst they could come up with about him, it just wasn't going to do anything. I don't really understand. And it was 4,000 words of waffle.
It was long, and it didn't say a lot.
Yeah.
And it was like he knew he didn't have a lot to say, and so he tried to make the whole point of his piece, here is why I don't have a lot to say. It's just very weird. Yeah. It seems so unprovoked. I read, you sent me the link to Brandon's response after his fans kind of like went to bat for him, and his response on Reddit was so gracious. And he just really does seem like such a humble dude, considering the level of success he's had. And his response just made the original piece seem even more like
petty.
Out of nowhere.
Just petty.
Yeah, petty. That is a good word for it. I think sometimes with this, it just comes down to to jealousy. And like somebody mentioned this, maybe it was the Esquire piece, maybe it was somewhere I read in the Reddit thread, I don't know, but I feel like this always, somebody out there has to pull this bullshit when it's genre fiction. Like people just don't like that genre fiction is massively popular. They don't like things with commercial appeal. He mentioned multiple times that in his opinion Sanderson's prose is not good. I have never read one of Brandon's books, so I can't comment on the quality of his prose, but I have heard this argument used about like Stephanie Meyer, somebody else that he had to mention in the article because they're Mormons, so they have to be lumped together for some reason.
They're all the same.
The quality of the Twilight books, which also, to be honest, I have not read. But the way I see it is like, maybe if it doesn't matter what you think of the quality of the prose, because the fact is these stories have resonated with millions of people. So that has to stand for something, you know, like not everything has to be this like, you know, Newbery Pulitzer level prose. It's wonderful that we have those books and they exist, but a lot of them aren't very accessible to a lot of readers. So why does that make the ones who are really accessible bad or not worthy? It's just a different thing. And there, people like this, the author of this particular article, just, I feel like they just have something is just sticking in their craw about genre fiction, and they come at it from that angle to begin with. Like he didn't want to like Brandon's writing.
No.
And I also found it interesting that he admitted to having read multiple of Brandon's books, and it's like, those books are tomes. If you really thought it was that bad, why are you reading so many of them? Maybe you found something more compelling in those stories than you'd care to admit.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that was surprising is that it was, you know, it's wired.com. It wasn't like it was a mainstream non-geek text altered, you know, type of website that just like the Guardian or the Observer in the UK, kind of mainstream newspapers. It wasn't like one of them sort of said, oh, this guy seems to be very good, let's go and talk to him and find out. It's like, it's wired.com. Surely it's somewhere within the wheelhouse. There's an overlap of people who look at that website are also into science fiction and fantasy. And so why that thing? So this person must have pitched it to their editor and said, let's do an in-depth article about him, because he doesn't seem to have had many done. That was one thing that was quite useful. That was probably the only thing that was useful in the article. He said, someone who's so big, there hasn't been that many in-depth articles. And probably thought, oh yeah, that's a great, let's find out a bit more about the guy. Yeah, who is the man behind all of the success? Okay. And then he obviously went in with an ulterior motive of, yeah, let's dig up some dirt. And then there wasn't anything, and it just turned into this kind of waffle for.
It did. And just the way he wrote, I couldn't get over the way he wrote about his fans. Like, you have to know what you're in for when you publish an article that is just clearly so like looking down on people who just like the genre of fantasy and enjoy going to conventions and doing cosplay and things. I thought we were past that. I thought we were past the phase where we shame nerds. I thought nerd culture was embraced in the last decade. Like, are we still doing this? Really? Like, let people like what they like. How are you telling me this is any different than the dudes who strip their tops and paint themselves and go to football games? And, you know, like, let people like what they like. We don't look down on that. So come on.
All the TV stuff now, the biggest TV shows, films, it's all based upon genre stuff, whether it's, you know, Lord of the Rings or The Witcher or all the Avengers stuff is, you know, Marvel comics are for nerds. And it's like some of the biggest selling films, bar Titanic, and even Avatar, you know, science fiction fantasy. I mean, come on, the last films of all of the last few years. And it's just, I thought we were in the age of the geek.
Absolutely.
Now you get people being like, oh, well, you know, comment here from someone saying, yeah, his prose is.
Sorry, I know, but God is high.
Yeah, so there you go. Saying
and why, and that's fine. Like, lyrical prose is wonderful, but not all stories need it.
Yeah,
that's my opinion. Like, we can have lots of different kinds of books.
Well, this is it. The other thing is not just the prose. It's that I sometimes want to read a book that's challenging. Sometimes I want to read a book that's thought-provoking. Sometimes I just want a fun book. Sometimes I just want a happy book. I want an adventure book. And over the last few years of worldwide pandemic, more upbeat books, cozy reads. This isn't the only reason, but Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree was so popular because everyone said, oh, it's a cozy comfort read. And, it's a lovely book and everyone says it's fantastic, but also it's kind of a nice kind of warm hug. And that kind of a thing these days, some people just want that. And I don't blame them. I want some of that.
Yeah.
So not every book has to be so purple and so kind of grandiose. And I'm thinking, sometimes I just want a good story, a good adventure, a bit of escapism.
And the thing is, sometimes you rarely see pieces like that go after authors or books, like in book reviews, like say New York Times book reviews of books that to me are like being kind of hailed as literary, but when I read them, I'm like, this is just navel-gazing, self-indulgent. I mean, I don't think that about all literary books. I've read some that I'm like, wow, this is really powerful, and like I find the writing really inspirational personally. But a lot of them, I'm like, this is boring. This is not. It's not literary just because your sentences take up an entire page. You know what I mean? Like some of them, I think, get a little more credit than they deserve.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of. I've read some that I feel like the author was experimenting prematurely. Like you kind of have to know the rules really well before you start breaking them that way.
I think so.
You know what I mean? And just because they experimented doesn't mean they pulled it off. But some, like every once in a while, one will fall through the cracks and it's getting like really glowing reviews. And I'm like, they use semicolons instead of commas. How is that? Like I literally read this ago, but I read a galley of a book that I was waiting for it to get trashed. It was like a pseudo celebrity, not a memoir though, it was fiction. And I was like, the only reason this person got a book deal is because of their platform. I read the galley. It was literally like semicolons instead of commas for no reason and random capitalization of certain letters in a way that was like a copy editor's nightmare because it wasn't consistent at all. And it got praised. And I was like, are the reviewers, are they afraid they don't understand it? And that's why they're talking about it positively? Because this is not good. This is not literary,
Or if the person has such a big platform, maybe they're concerned of being the one bad review and they're going, oh, now you're just bitter because this person's so popular and they've actually written a good book and you should be celebrating them moving into this new era, as opposed to if it wasn't them and I was reviewing it, I would actually have said it's just bad. So
I really think that was a part of it. And this was one of those galleys that went out with like, in the front was a letter from the publisher saying, here's why this book is so important and so meaningful to me. So they really set it up like you're about to be wowed. And I guess some reviewers just like, maybe they were wowed. Maybe I'm in the wrong, but I thought it was just like, there were objective issues with it. But anyway, I don't know.
Stephen saying what we'd say, that John fiction saying that it has to have saying like Die Hard movies need to be brooding character exploration. You're right. Sometimes they're just good films.
Exactly.
I heard that. Yeah. The other thing I want to talk about on this was I was they went after Brandon, which was silly for so many reasons. But I also thought if they'd gone after someone else somewhere in the mid list, whether it was genuine interest in doing a detailed piece, or they were trying to do it turned out to end up being a hit piece, the damage could have been a lot more severe. Like if there had been some kind of a skeleton. I mean, if it was the same kind of waffly nonsense of they came after you or I and they just said, oh, they're really boring. And then it would have backfired again. They would have gone, why are you picking on this person? I'm going to go and read that person's book because you're being ridiculous about them. I'm now interested in this person. They got them. But if there had been some dirt or something that was contrary and had gone after a mid-lister, it could have effectively ended their career.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think he would have. I mean, it seemed like the reason this author went after Brandon is because of his massive success. Like he talked about how he wasn't a household name like Rowling and things like that. But I think Brandon's Kickstarter campaign last year got a lot of attention. I mean, that got like national media coverage.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe he's not quite a household name yet, but I wouldn't say that nobody's heard of him either. You know what I mean? Like outside of like fantasy and publishing worlds. So I don't know if a person would have like come at a mid-lister with that kind of hit piece because they wouldn't have been motivated to take him down, because that's what this guy wanted to do, whether he admits it or not. That's how I feel. You know, he just, there's like a saltiness to the like, well, his writing isn't, you know, great, therefore he doesn't deserve the success that he has, and I'm gonna, like, I don't know. It was like you could feel that he just wanted Brandon to say something that he could use as a pull quote that would, like, turn people against him or something.
Yeah.
You know, which is so messed up. It's so messed up. Like, I hate how, I understand that, you know, websites like Wired and any publication, like, clickbait titles exist for a reason, because as humans we click on controversial, you know, stuff that sounds salacious, and we don't click on the boring stuff. But I think that sucks. And I'm trying, like, that's something that I personally try to change about myself. I really, you know, like, I try to pay attention to why I'm clicking on what I'm clicking on, because your click is your support when you're talking about outlets like this. And I don't necessarily want to support things like this that are, I don't know, or things that are like, yeah, just hit pieces against people. I don't know. I'm kind of lost my train of thought there, but it's just sad that we can't just appreciate that he's a nice dude who's making a good living doing what he loves and making a ton of people really happy.
Yeah.
Can we enjoy that? Can we just have this?
I think part of it, not just him, but in other aspects of our society, we view some celebrities, as you say, who've gone so high, and we don't think they should be there. And there's that thing of not only looking for a way to tear them down, but to find out, you know, do they actually deserve it? What have they actually accomplished? Because some people are internet famous, some people are in a celebrity, but only because they've been in, like, a game show or a TV show or you know, reality TV, and then they're put in the same rank as other kind of celebrities, like Denzel Washington and the person from The Only Way is Essex, both on the red carpet. And I'm like, I do that. And then they're going, yeah, that person was on a reality TV show, and this is an Oscar-winning actor, and you're putting them on the same level. It's like, I do that. I'm also like you. I'm trying to modify my behavior. That if I see an article saying with a clickbaity headline, thinking, right, hang on, no, if I click on this, I'm supporting this thing, I'm promoting this thing, they're getting the hits and the likes and the looks that they want. So I'm it's part of the social media, I think, that's a bit, you know, one of the many things about social media that's quite destructive.
Oh my gosh, so destructive. It really is. I deliberately last year subscribed to a newsletter that's like, every morning it delivers news from around the world that is positive. Because there is a lot of good, it seems like when you just look at regular news stations here, and I'm sure in the UK,
same.
like, the world is a giant trash fire every freaking day. And all those things are happening. I get that. But, like, good things happen too. And I want to know about them. And I think it's good for my mental health to know about them, to know that, like, good things are happening, and just, like, also to support the sharing of that information, because people need to be reminded of it. Because so much of what we see in the news too is just, like, exaggerated fear mongering, you know. I'm sorry, I'm getting way off topic now, but that's,
no, it's fine, it's fine.
But that's something that's been bugging me for a while. I was also thinking something I wanted to bring up about the Wired piece. Is he really just mentioned that Brandon was Mormon like 50 times, in case you forgot. And he said, what was it? Oh, he brought up that his old, like, Brandon had some pieces published from decades ago about what he thought about his church's stance on, like, LGBT issues. And they were, you know, it was very much like it's not, what's the quote they say? It's not a sin to think it, it's a sin to act on it, or whatever that, you know, we've heard lots of churches say. And Brandon supported that. And he even talked about how he's like, he said something, so this might have been in the Esquire piece. I really liked how he said it. He was like, I cringe every time that piece is brought up, but I'm grateful that it's out there, because it was like the catalyst for me evolving my opinion. And that's another thing, is like, was the Wired guy bringing this up because that's what cancel culture tends to do, is like, let's go dig around in somebody's past and bring up something they did decades ago and like not acknowledge at all that they are allowed to evolve as people. And
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying it's, I'm not going to say it's something we should celebrate, because it's like, celebrating that view is not something I personally, I don't support what he used to think, obviously, but like, I think it's awesome that he's changed his
Owning it and
very
saying, I've
and
evolved.
and talking about it, because like, if we punish people for doing that, and then we're just telling people who are right now at the point where Brandon was, we're telling them there's no point in you evolving. You know what I mean? Or like,
Well, they tried it with James Gunn. Like, they dug up some stuff that he'd said years ago, and he said, "Yeah, I was young and I was stupid and I said some horrible things," and he got fired from Marvel. Was it Marvel that fired him? And then he went off and James Gunn, the director, Guardians of the Galaxy. Like,
yeah,
so I'm sure he got fired. Someone will correct me in the comments, but he got fired from Marvel. And
right.
then people were like, yeah, but he's not that guy anymore, and he's changed. And then he got another job, and then Marvel were like, oh, well, no, come back. And now he's back at Marvel. Now he's doing stuff for DC. And it was all very kind of like, they've done this before. They dig up something. So they tried it with Brandon, and he said, I think people had said to him, he'd viewed LGBT things through the lens of his church because that's what he did as a younger man. But from talking to other people, he's evolved his attitudes and his beliefs towards that, and he's tried to contribute more of that into his books and integrate it in a more healthy and honest way. And that's basically what he was saying. I've grown. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, he's grown, so what's wrong with that? And it was another poor attempt to kind of,
it's terrible. It's honestly, it's in cases like that, I think it's the exact opposite of what you want. You want to punish someone for evolving? Really? Is that what we're doing? Yeah. Everybody said or did dumb stuff in their past. Everybody has grown in some ways. I said a lot of, I'm sure I said all kinds of dumb stuff when I was in college. I'm so glad social media didn't exist back then, because
just about to say that we're of a similar age, that I'm glad that growing up, not everything I wrote, not everything I said was on the internet or on social media. We didn't have the internet nearly. We did all sorts of stuff, and it's like, I'm glad, because if I'm having a bad day back then and I say something, no one sees it. But having a bad day now and I go on Twitter and say something, and I'm thinking, yeah, I was having a really bad day then. And then people are like, but you said this. I'm like, yeah, I may have been having a terrible day. You don't know what was going on. But anyway, hi Emma. Emma's come to say hi. Roman's right from UK. A year on YouTube. Hi nice. Emma. So we'll come back in a minute, but I've got a question from Stephen saying, if you're a new author like myself and you're looking for clout on social media, how do you stand out if you're not allowed to really stand out?
Oh man, I don't even know. I think we would have to really get into like, what social media platforms do you want to be on, because they're all so different at this point. Growing on Instagram is very different from TikTok, is very different from YouTube. And I don't even know what's happening at Twitter anymore. It seems like that whole thing is like the Titanic.
It still exists, and I kind of talk to people in my corner, and I just kind of use it as a coffee cooler, a water cooler thing, just talking to people, have a coffee break, chat to people 20 minutes, and then I come off, and that's, I think, the best way to do it. The owner and all of that stuff, I kind of, how you stand out, the first thing is only use the social media that you're comfortable with and that you have time to, because like anything else, it takes time to dedicate it and grow it. As we both know from our YouTube channels, trying to grow it, it's like, do so many videos a week, and then you can start quite high at one point, but if you have to sustain it over years, that's difficult.
Right.
Book talk, I thought about doing it, but equally, I'm not comfortable doing funny videos and making stuff up on video all the time, and that was never going to be for me. And TikTok in general, I'm happy with words than pictures. I mean, Instagram's quite gentle. You post a picture, you talk about something, but it's not the same level. So I don't think you need to stand out. I think you need to build, if you're using it as an author, you need to use social media to build a brand. And if you have something that's just for you with your mates, being yourself, have something completely separate that people don't know is you, where you can just be yourself, but you build a presence. Like websites, some authors' websites integrate their Twitter, so it comes up down the side as a stream, and people can see that. So therefore, if you said something and you've had a really bad day, and they come on your website and it's spooling down the side and it's full of abuse, or like some authors who went on terrible political rants on Twitter and were then sacked by their publisher for being too political.
Yeah.
And lost their book deals, or things like that. So I think the work always has to speak for itself. I think you should always have a website. That's kind of standard. And beyond that, it's dealer's choice, what you feel comfortable doing and what you want to do regularly. What do you think, Michelle?
I agree. It used to be advice was you have to be everywhere. You should just have a presence everywhere so that readers on Pinterest can find you and readers on Instagram can find you. And it's like, I totally disagree with that, because if you don't want to actually maintain those, then a stagnant, dead, unupdated account does not look good. It actually looks worse than no account at all, I think. So I would pick whatever platforms you really like you enjoy them as a consumer of content, and you want to make whatever for that platform. The only thing I did for like 3 years was YouTube, and I don't regret that. I do not regret leaving Twitter, Instagram. It was just not for me. And I don't think I'm missing anything by not spending time on those platforms. And then I very recently decided to move my newsletter to Substack. And I've been doing that because Substack is kind of social media-ish in that you're sending a newsletter, but it's also published kind of like a blog, and it notifies subscribers and all. And then you can have like conversations. So it's kind of social media-ish. And that's it. That's it. Because those are the only things I like. So that's really it. And like clout, really, really, everybody says this, and I don't think anybody takes it seriously at first, but like it really is better to have a small but tight core audience who loves you than 100,000 subscribers, most of whom aren't going to click when you upload a new video because they just kind of hit the button. You really, like, when you get comments, when you get engagement, really comment back meaningfully, like get to know the people who are taking the time to follow you and comment on your stuff and build relationships with them. That's more important than clout in terms of numbers.
And people say, I've heard some people who are writing that want to be published saying, you need to have so many followers on this platform or that platform. But my feedback is always, even if that were true and it was 100,000, say, on Twitter, you might only get engagement from 2 or 3% of that. And so you don't actually have 100,000 people. When you put out a book, you're not going to get 100%, 50%, 20% actually putting the hand in the pocket and buying the book. So it's better to have a dedicated group of people. And if they've subscribed to your particular newsletter, they want to know from you. They're not just clicking a like button on Twitter or something. I mean, so I have my website and have articles that I post, like blogs on there, but people can just subscribe to that newsletter part of my website, and I can see how many people have subscribed, and I can see, so I know that, that's who it's going out to, and they're actually reading it because they want to see that thing. Whereas people on Twitter just kind of go, yeah, that's fun, click like, but do they buy the book? I don't know.
Most of them don't. And I think publishers are really starting to figure this out finally, after spending years throwing giant book deals at people who had like, a huge, like millions of followers on some social media platform, and then it not leading to sales. And it's not just publishing. Like there's a kind of infamous story out there about some influencer who had like 6 million Instagram followers, launched her what's it called? Her line of, they sell like t-shirts and
merchandise and
merchandise, and sold like 6 shirts. It's like, it doesn't, just because people will follow you for free does not mean they're gonna buy stuff from you. It just doesn't translate. And especially with what we do, like I think on any social media platform, but definitely on YouTube, as writers, we don't always get people following us because they care about our books. They're looking for like insights from an author who is published and what their life is like, tips and I know, especially in the beginning of my journey, I would have been all over following. I wouldn't have cared what genre they were writing in. If AuthorTube had existed back then, all of them, like show me everything about their lives, but it wouldn't, I don't know if I would have bought books from any of them. No, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just that like, that's not how I shop for books. You know what I mean? I don't know.
It's true. So this is a related question, I guess, saying you could hide your past. When should the public ever be informed on an author's issues? I guess that's separating the author from their work, which is, I mean, I've touched on this in videos, and I know you have too as well.
I think like, I mean, something like child abuse, that's different. That's like, that's an actual crime. I know for me, when it involves children, I get extra hot about it. Like, no. But in general, I think the way I feel about separating an author from their work is, most of the time, I'm probably not just going to lose my desire to read an author's work when I find out something about them that really repels me, like a history of child abuse. But I also I don't prescribe that for everybody. You know, I hope it's not too controversial to bring this up, but like talking about Harry Potter, I've read a lot of it and listened to a lot of accounts from transgender people who are like just really hurt and saddened by her comments. But Harry Potter was such a huge part, not just of them growing up, but like learning who they were, being a part of these fandom communities, which are often just filled with LGBT people. And like Harry Potter was part of their own self-discovery about themselves, and they still love Harry Potter. And I think that's okay. I can understand that it would give you very mixed emotions to have like these feelings about the author, but love the work so much. But I wouldn't judge that at all. And I would also totally understand if someone never wanted to read or support a Harry Potter thing ever again. I think it's really, we should leave it to the individual to decide how they want to feel about it and how they want to act on it, and not judge it.
It's difficult. So I grew up reading David Eddings, and it was only years later all this stuff came out. So I in my formative years, in early teens, there wasn't as much fantasy as there is now. There just wasn't in the 80s. And I loved his books growing up then. Now I've gone back and tried to read some of them, and they seem very basic, and they seem almost, as a 40-something man read them, they feel like middle grade or even younger or YA-ish. Probably middle grade, because there wasn't much kind of adult content. It was kind of glossed over. So trying to read it now, it's not my cup of tea. But it was an informative series in my younger years. It's something that fired my imagination of fantasy. And it was years later this stuff came out and we found out about him. But it's not to say I don't love the books for them opening my imagination to the idea of what fantasy could be. But him as an individual, obviously, I just find him, repulsive. I believe he's passed away since, him and his wife. But I mean, there are some authors that I won't read because I know of some of their personal beliefs that I just can't get behind at all. And I'm like, I don't want to go into who they are, but some people are like, well, where do you draw the line? How far is, it could be that person's a particular religion that you don't like generally because of X, Y, and Z, and therefore I'm not going to read their books, versus someone said a mean thing once about something on Twitter about a particular group, therefore I'm not going to read their books ever again. And you see these kind of knee-jerk reactions, and there's no nuance to some of it, where something like this is very clear cut. Someone's done something terrible versus they said something mean, therefore
who hasn't?
Yeah,
I think a huge part of it too is when you find out about the author. If it's like you were saying about Eddings, if it's something that you grew up with and you knew nothing about the author as a kid, it was just,
we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the internet.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to cut the ties because you took that story as just, it's a thing that existed and interpreted it the way you wanted to. But now when we find out certain abhorrent things that some writers have said or done, and then we try to read their books, we have that part of them, in our muddling with our interpretation of the story as readers. And for some of us, it's just a little too much. I think that's what it comes down to for me. Yeah.
Let's move on, because this is starting to get so one of the other things we're going to talk about was AI and Chat GPT and So at EasterCon that I went to a couple of weeks ago, one of the main topics was people talking about this and sort of saying, what do we think? And I know a number of science fiction and fantasy magazines have kind of had to close their submissions because they had a massive flood of people writing stories with the help of AI and ChatGPT and sending them in. And the people reading them like, well, this is obviously not written by a person. Why? And it just flooded their inboxes. So they had to kind of say, no, we're closed, and then readjust the submission guidelines to say, no AI stories. And then what did I read? And I sent you the link. I'll read the headline for those who don't know about it.
That was something.
One World has then acquired an AI-inspired adult debut novel from this particular author. So it's a debut author. And he wrote it with the help of a chat GPT. He posed a question to this thing and asked them to tell him a story about it, and it did. And then that's going to be a new debut novel from this author. I'm horrified. What do you think?
I was laughing at the premise of that book. You did not read the best.
I did not read the title. Sorry. The title, sorry, where is it? Benny and the Blue Whale. Oh, sorry, Benny the Blue Whale. And it is about Benny the Blue Whale, a chat GPT fantasy and chaos story where the author asked it to tell him a story about a large blue whale with a small penis. And this is the story that it's created. There's going to be a novel coming out in November this year, which is also kind of insane to me. Like, it's April.
That is crazy. That is really crazy. Okay, I have a confession. First of all, I have a confession. I have not used the chat API or whatever it's called personally. Okay, but I work for a book packager, right? And so what we do is we come up with ideas for books, develop proposals, hire authors, and sell the books, right? We're working on a fantasy project right now, and one of the editors, we were struggling to come up with this very particular, I think it was like a plot point that involved the magic system in this world. And we were just kind of having a day where we were feeling uninspired, and we were like, I don't know. And so one editor was like, okay, I'm going to chat API. And she typed in the question, like, give me ideas for, and typed in our whole premise. And it generated a list. And some of them were nonsensical, but I have to tell you, like 5 or 6 of them were solid suggestions. And I was like, so this is another interesting way to use this, not to write my story. I would never obviously do that, but almost as like a sounding board, because like we use name generators all the time. It's like a step up from that. But I don't know. I still have mixed feelings about the fact that this is even a possibility now. I don't know.
But just by posing a series of questions to this thing and getting it to tell you the story, and then that's the novel that's coming out.
Yeah.
I mean, if this proves popular, I think it'll just be a weird little phase. I don't think everyone's like, oh, it's going to change everything. I'm like, no, it hasn't, because it has no experience. It has no soul. It has no knowledge. It's just information that's been fed into it.
It's a novelty. The first couple will get attention because because of the API thing. And then after that, it has to actually be a good, engaging story for people to want to buy it. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm not as nervous about all this AI stuff as I should be, but I just feel like people create art. And I don't doubt that AI can do some really amazing things, but I don't know. Maybe I have a little bit more faith in humanity than I should.
It's an odd thing. I just saw it and it was such a weird thing after people saying, AI is not going to change anything. And then that came out and I'm like, oh my God.
No, I wonder about it. Like, okay, I will say this, and maybe I shouldn't be, maybe I should stay in my lane as a traditionally published author, but I feel like I would be personally more nervous if I was a self-published author who was like really grinding to do the rapid release. I'm putting out a book in a series every month or something, just like lightning fast, because AI could kick my ass there. Now, I'm not saying quality-wise it would necessarily be better or worse than what a lot of self-published authors are doing, but just because that the speed of the release and keeping people hooked in your series is such a key part of success when you're self-publishing that way.
Yeah.
AI could be a competitor there. That would make me nervous.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the weird thing is with traditional, as a series goes on, sales tail off always, and the first book in a series always does very, very well. Whereas with self-publishing, longer series do better, and the more books, the better. And if you run on a KDP model or a paid per page model with Amazon, the longer the books, the better as well. If anyone only reads 300 pages out of a 600-page novel, you still get paid for those 300 pages. So it's such a different, as you say, but it requires that you have that rapid release. It requires that you have several books a year. It requires dedication to writing, editing, doing all of that, but also the business side and all the rest of it, which I don't have time to do. You know, it's one of the many reasons I'm traditional published. I just don't have time to do that as long as everything else and write books.
Yeah.
So,
you know, another piece of it that I think is interesting is that readers really are so passionate now about engaging with authors and like interviews, going to events, meeting them, and finding out what inspired you to write this story. You know, tell us about this, tell us about that. And like, there's none of that with an AI. Ultimately, as a reader, you know, there's nothing behind it. You know, whereas with an author, there is. It came from a person's imagination, and there's like a natural curiosity there. I again, maybe I'm having too much faith in people, but
no, I think you are. Like, so I heard of one author when I went to an event in Chicago in February. I knew a little bit about him, but from meeting to him, talking to him, seeing him talk on panels, I found him to be charming and interesting and funny. I bought more of his books. I went and got them signed, and I brought them home because I'd engaged with him as an individual. So, you know, he was such a fascinating guy. I'm like, oh, I'll get some more of his books. He's a great guy. And there isn't any of that with the AI. So it will be a weird little fad. I think so. It could be a useful tool. So Goddess, as you said, what you'd said, an interesting tool for brainstorming.
Yes.
Yeah, but not writing books. And
here's the thing, and maybe I'm just using this as an excuse because of what we did in the book packager, but like using it for brainstorming, really, isn't that just like using Google on speed? I mean, isn't that ultimately what we're doing if we're like, we're researching and trying to come up with ideas? Because don't we all do that when we're writing a novel? How much time do you spend on Google and Wikipedia, falling down rabbit holes and reading things? AI is just going to do that lightning fast for you. So I don't know. It might be it might be able to help us. Maybe I should try it.
I think it'd be a good tool. Dolores has said, meet an author and buy their books based upon them. I think that's true. You do a lot of that. So the third thing we're going to talk about is that a while ago someone posed a tweet that went viral. I know you're not on Twitter, so I told you about this, where someone had said, if you had to have 10,000 words cut from your novel and you had to wait 2 years, but at the end of that you were guaranteed a traditional publishing deal, would you go for it? And myself and a number of other traditionally published authors in many genres replied and said, sounds kind of standard. Yeah, sounds fair to me. And a lot of people replied going, no, that's ridiculous. No, 10,000 words, I'm not doing that. And one of the best comments I saw was 10,000 words. If you want to do that, you have to write the book yourself. If you're going to cut 10,000 words. And I was just kind of like, what? And the 2-year thing, 2-year thing, yes. Traditional publishing is slow. We've talked about this ad infinitum. We just said, if you're self-publishing, you can put 3, 4, 5 books out a year. As fast as you can write them and edit them, they can go out. But 10,000 words on a fantasy novel, sci-fi novel, that's like nothing. It's nothing. It's less.
Not even 10%. It's probably less. Yeah. I will say this for novels, you know, longer than 90,000 words, your first draft will benefit from cutting 10,000 words. And you can be as butthurt about that as you want to be. But like, I've been an editor for a long time, and it's not meant to insult you. It's like your writing could be tighter. You think that all those words are necessary, but they're not. They're just not. And this is why this is like the core of why I get defensive when people talk about writing for children like it's like a lesser thing than writing for adults, because you have to keep the word count short for children, and that's a challenge. That doesn't make it easier, that makes it harder.
Yeah,
you have to keep a kid's attention. Do you know how hard that is to keep a kid's attention for 200 pages? You have to be more concise, more economical with your words. And ultimately you have a better book for it. Yeah, that's funny. Like, if you want to pick self-publishing over traditional publishing, by all means go ahead. Everybody has a different right path for them, but to get so upset about the 10,000 words, like, man, that just tells me so much about the writer. You're too precious. You need to let go of the ego a little bit and be receptive to criticism, because overwriting is a thing.
Yeah.
You know?
First drafts are messy. They need a lot of work. I think it was my second or third draft on one book. I went to my agent and she said, cut 20,000 words. The first third is too slow. So that was my target. I think I cut 18, but in the process of then editing it with my editor at the publisher, I added 10 or 12 in, but not in the same place, in other places where we took some more out. So it ended up a little down on the word count from that 20, but it's still, it sped up that first third. We got to things more quickly. We moved the story on. We added more detail in, But yes, as you're saying, it shows a level of people being precious with their words, that they think everything they write is golden and everything. And I'm like, the number of videos out there about the editing process and the different stages we go through, and self-published authors go through. It's not just us.
No.
That's the other thing people don't realize. Self-published authors go through exactly the same editing stages, if they're any good, and most of them do.
And here's the thing that they fundamentally don't understand clearly, is that it's not that editors get a manuscript and say, okay, I'm just going to blanket tell them to cut 10,000 words. There's a reason behind it. Like, there's clutter that's happening. You know what I mean? Or there's like a subplot that doesn't need to be there. There's always a reason for it. It's not like some kind of hammer they throw down just to be mean. Editors want books to be good. They want it to be good just as much as you do, it's like, I don't know. They're talking about it like it's a punishment you go through. It's like, no, this is your editor helping you. When you were a kid in school and your teacher would grade your paper, they were trying to help you make your essay better. They weren't trying to punish you. It's their job.
Yeah. It's that thing of gatekeepers. There's still some of that attitude that persists around traditional publishing, saying agents are there to stop you getting in. And I'm like, no, they're there to keep the crap out, because they want a good book, because if it's rubbish, they can't sell it, and they can't, with the right mind, take it to a publisher, and then the publisher can't sell it. So I hate that kind of idea of gatekeepers. I think we need a different word to gatekeepers.
Oh, no, it's terrible. Literary agents live on 15% commission. I would say they want deals more than we do. Like, come on, it's their livelihood. Of course they want to sell.
I know. I haven't seen it as much, but every now and then I look for videos on YouTube that people talking about self-publishing versus traditional, and I have to do a kind of rebuttal of the ridiculous stuff that comes out. I haven't seen as much lately,
which is nice.
Yeah, one of my least favorite channels. He hasn't done a video in a while about this. He's got bored and he's gone on to do something else now.
Oh, that's
nice. But yeah, some of the nonsense that persists.
It's fine. You can tout the benefits and the pros of self-publishing without saying false things about traditional publishing. Like, traditional publishing has a crap load of very valid issues. I have a whole playlist on my channel dedicated to all the things wrong with traditional publishing. But like, we don't need all the silly rumors like you have no control over, you're signing away the copyright. Like, you know what my books say? They say copyright Michelle Schusterman. That's not true.
Look at the front of every book and you'll see it.
I don't know. Yeah.
That baffles me. Yeah.
That's a good one.
It's just that thing of the number of videos out there and the number of people talking about writing, and they still go with rumors as opposed to talking to someone who's actually done the thing.
Yeah.
I still struggle with that. I feel sometimes like we're just trying to push water up a hill with our channels, because I'm just like, it's frustrating.
It is. People, and it really does scare people off. And going the traditional publishing route is not for everyone. But that doesn't, I don't know. Sometimes I think back again, like if AuthorTube had been around when I was starting on my journey, I think a lot of it would have gotten into my head. It might have scared me off of querying. As it was, all of the information I could find online was I was following a lot of literary agents and editors who had blogs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading advice for them on querying. But you know what? I was nervous, but I was excited the first time I queried. I was just so excited. And the first rejection letter I got, obviously I was disappointed, but I also felt like I'm doing it. It was like this celebration. But I feel like if I had consumed all of these videos of people just telling me like all the ways agents and editors are out to get you and they don't want you to succeed, it might have genuinely scared me off of trying. And self-publishing would not have been an option for me because I was dead broke. I didn't have any money. Like I couldn't have put anything into self-publishing a book, even like the barest budget.
It didn't exist at the same level that it did now when I was
it's
growing
true.
up. It was vanity press. That was the only
Yeah.
thing that, there wasn't the digital aspect didn't exist. And when I first started querying, like you, I was nervous. So there's a famous literary agent in the UK called John Jarrold. He's a very famous science fiction fantasy author, and he used to be an editor at a publisher for like 10, 15 years, and he's been a literary agent for the last 25 years or something now. And I'd go, like you, I'd go to conventions and events, and I'd sit and listen to him. And one of his things about, how does he know if a book is good? His kind of catchphrase was, if I don't say wow, I say no. And that was his thing. And I'm like, okay, so I've really got to be good. I've really got to wow him. It's got to be exciting. It's got to be, rewarding. It's got to have some bit of magic or sparkle that makes him go, oh, and sit forward. But then finding out about Stephen King, but it was only years later I read On Writing with him with the whole nail on the wall and his rejections. It made me feel better being like, dude got rejected so many times. He had to put a bigger nail on the wall and put more his rejections on.
Yeah. And it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's true. It makes you stronger. If you can just keep coming back from that, you will be a better writer, when I think back to the first couple books I wrote that were never published, I'm glad they weren't published, but I'm also glad I wrote them. I needed to write them. I needed to get better, that's what led me to where I am. I don't know.
No, it's true. I've got trunk novels too. Some people are for some reason just better earlier on. I wasn't one of those people. I just had to work through the bad books maybe, or I don't subscribe to the Gladstone thing of 10,000 hours and 1,000,000 words to get to skill up. But I think you still have to practice anything to get better at it. And the more novels I write, hopefully the better I get at doing certain things and improving my technique or trying different things,
That's funny. This is exactly what my last newsletter was about. But when we talk about like word counts and productivity, slow writers get defensive about their slowness and say they're focusing on quality. And fast writers get defensive about quality because people like to say that if you're writing really fast, it's probably not very good. And I just don't think it's about quality versus quantity at all, because you need quantity to get to quality. You have to, it's like, have you read, I know everybody's read this. Have you read Atomic Habits by James Clear?
No.
It's a book about, it's like a nonfiction book about building small habits to change the way you do things. And there's a story in it about a photography class, and the professor split his class up into two groups. Group A was told they had to take 100 photos over the course of like a month. And then at the end of the experiment, they would take their best of 100 photos, and that was the one they would be graded on. And the other group B was told you can only take one picture, and so you can put all of your time and energy into making this the best picture possible, and that will be the photo you're graded on. And at the end of it, all of the quantity groups were graded much higher, because while these guys were sitting around talking about what makes a great, beautiful photo, these ones were out taking crap loads of bad photos and figuring out how to actually master their craft and get better. You have to write lots of words to figure out how to write good words. So I hate that it gets like split into this quality versus quantity thing, But writing fast is relative anyway. Like what's fast for me is probably different for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a contest.
No. And the editing phase, as much as I hate it, I know how critical it is to improving what you've done, because having an editor look at my book is brilliant, because they can see the wood for the trees, and most of the time I can't, and I miss things, because it's that thing of you spend so long with your head down focused on this thing, and it's all in your head and you're running around with it, that you need someone to step back. And I can't do that. I can look at someone else's book very easily and look at things and go, oh, this, and this, but doing it on my own, I just can't get that distance.
Yeah.
So having someone else come in as a fresh pair of eyes is so important.
Right.
And it just, I try sometimes things with my books and think, oh, maybe I'll try a bit of this and try a bit of that and experiment. But you still have to have a base. You still have to be a strong foundation. And I think it was Stephen King there again that said, when you first start writing, you're copying someone else's style that you kind of like. And it's through the process of working on your stuff that you find out what your own style or voice, whatever it might be, is. And I agree with that. I think that's solid advice.
Absolutely. That's why I when I used to teach writing workshops for like kids, usually around age 9 to 12, some teenagers, they wrote, a lot of them wanted to write fan fiction. And sometimes the parents would be concerned, like, I want you to teach her how to do real writing. And I'm like, no, let her write fan fiction, because she's trying to copy her favorite author, and that's how she's going to learn. Mm-hmm. I think fan fiction is one of the best ways to figure out your voice as a writer, you know? Mm-hmm. Like the fact is, these kids are like churning out hundreds of pages a week in worlds and with characters that are already created. So it's freeing them up to like play. What better way is there to learn how to write, you know?
I did it. I did fan fiction. And I did it I took it a step further, actually. Here's I could say this because this is years ago now. So okay. For those of us who are old enough to remember, there were some TV shows in America that had an open door policy. So do you remember this? So back in the day, you could, if you were a fan, you could send in a script to Star Trek: The Next Generation. What? And then later Star Trek DS9 and Voyager. And if you had an idea and you wrote a script, you could send it in and they would consider it. And if they like it, they would take it on and go through the process. So there were about, I think it's 8 or 10 scripts. I'm probably get the numbers wrong, that were fans that have episodes of these shows made. Now, it was started by Michael Piller, who sadly has passed away, but he was very encouraging of getting new voices in, new people, new writers, new perspectives. And he took it onto other shows, and other shows did it. And there was a TV show called The Dead Zone back in the day, which was based upon the Stephen King novel. Mm-hmm. And me and a friend, there again, this is the ultimate fan fiction. I studied the show. I watched it. I looked for scripts online on PDF. I wrote a script for The Dead Zone. I sent it in. Now, it wasn't made, but we got positive feedback saying,
that's awesome.
Like, this is a really good script. We really like this. However, we can't do it because we're doing something a little bit similar. They couldn't go into too much detail of the whole thing. I wasn't going to be like, oh, you're stealing my idea, but they were being careful. But he said, this is quite good. And basically that was me copying the style of the show, copying the characters, going, how can I make this John's voice? How can I make this?
Oh, that's the best way to learn. I just think that's awesome. Yep.
I mean, they closed the door. Sadly, they stopped doing it in like 2005. I think they stopped doing it on Star Trek shows and other things. But back then, you could do it. You could actually go and do it. And I mean, it's crazy to think about it now, but it happened and it was real and it was the ultimate kind of level of fan fiction.
Oh, yeah, so. That's amazing. That's so cool. I had no idea that was a thing.
It was brilliant. Zach said about someone saying she writes fast because she likes to. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, some people just write fast. Like one of my closest friends is an author of horror and fantasy, and she has received more starred reviews than I can count. She has won awards. And specifically when people talk about her books, they talk about her prose. It is beautiful on a sentence level. And I can attest to the fact, because I have done this with her, where we swap chapters. Like, we will share Google Docs of projects we're working on, and chapter by chapter, just to cheerlead each other on.
Nice.
I have opened her Google Doc and literally watched her write her first draft, and she will write 4,000 or 5,000 words per session, and it pours out of her that beautiful. Some people just have that gift. And that's great. And I won't say I'm not a little bit envious of it, but like it was again proof to me that we're all just different, and writing a lot of words doesn't mean you're writing bad words. You know, some people can just do both, and some people need to take their time, and that's okay too. If you're a slow writer, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, yeah. You got 50 Shades of Rudy fanfic. Yeah, there you go. There it was. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wish some authors would finish their series. That's the other thing, though. That's like
who are you talking about there?
That's a totally different kind of kettle of fish. That's just people not wrapping up the series that they said they would. You know.
Speaking of, I'm very curious as to why. Now that you've told me about this policy we used to have about like allowing fans to enter scripts, I feel like HBO should have done that with Game of Thrones. They should have made that last season like, let's open it up, fans, because I bet they would have gotten some great scripts that were so much better than the final season they put out there.
I mean, we've now got 2 spin-offs. So we've got the House of the Dragon. They're doing another one about Egg, I'm sure.
Okay.
And I think they're probably going to do a thrd one. They're doing Lord of the Rings, but they're now the Rings of Power. But I think they're doing another spin-off show probably in that world.
For Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. I think they're doing a second show. I'm sure something. But it's that thing of, if it's within such a large IP, do something different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really off topic, but the Star Wars universe is obviously owned by Disney now.
Yeah.
And we've just had a series called Andor. I don't know if you watched it. So it had nothing really to do with the Skywalkers and lightsabers and Jedis. It was a totally different story. And it was just like, the universe is so big, and here's a story over here, whereas the other stories we've had of just like 9 films all about this.
Yeah.
And TV shows all about this. I'm just like, oh God, can we have something else?
Yeah.
So yeah, getting someone to pitch a story set within the world of Game of Thrones now for a spin-off show that isn't like anything else, that would be fascinating to see.
Yeah, it really would. I'm like, my mind is blown that this used to be a thing, and now I want it to be a thing again, because fans are brilliant. I would bet every penny I have that if they had done that for Game of Thrones, that last season would have been phenomenal. You just know there are a ton of fans out there that could have written some incredible scripts that really like tied it up in a satisfying way, you know?
Yeah. I mean, so Ronald D. Moore, who was the showrunner on Battlestar Galactica and a bunch of other stuff, he was one of the very new writers that was brought in. He wasn't a fan that had written a script, but he was someone who did like his first couple of scripts on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then he ended up writing like 20, and then he did the next show, and they did the next show, and then he became a huge showrunner and stuff. And that was just from someone who was not in the business, wasn't known. And I know in Hollywood they have writers' rooms, but equally having that extra element these days, I think, would be remarkable. If fans if they either know the source material, I mean, some of them will just, the ideas will be trash, but they are anyway, like with submissions to agents. They say, I'm going to be the next big so-and-so, and you read it and you go, come on. I'm not giving this to my 5-year-old. I'm not going to give it to a network television, you know? So having someone else but come in who actually knows it and could come up with a better idea.
Yeah.
They love making money, so they want to make more money.
I know. The more you say it, the more I'm like, this is a win-win. And I think it would get even more attention and views and fans, because people would want to see what another fan,
one of their own, made it.
No,
one of their own got in through the door and made this thing happen. You know, it was it was a remarkable time to think about it.
It
on
is
some shows.
Very cool.
We're getting close to the end of the hour, so if anyone's got any other questions, post them in about, you know, writing, publishing, agents, anything. Let us know. But we'll be wrapping up soon. But yeah, so what are you working on now? Tell the people what you're doing. What's coming up?
I am just now finishing up, like hopefully later today or tomorrow morning, a middle grade mystery that is actually going to be like I would say 70% novel and 30% graphic novel, which is a new little, I'm trying something a little experimental. and I'm sending it to my beta readers tomorrow. And that is going to be something I try to use to get me a new agent, since my agent retired and I am still agentless. And then also I've got just the book packager thing is taking up a lot of time, and I have one ghostwriting client right now and one book coach client. And the book coach client is fixing to go on sub in a couple weeks, but I have to do a lot of proofing on their proposal. So yeah, lots of balls in the air at the moment. How about you?
So I'm working on book 3 of the new trilogy now. My deadline's Christmas, so I've got plenty of time.
Oh, good.
But book 1 comes out July this year. So that's me for the next sort of 3 years. But later on, if I get this book done sooner, in the latter quarter of this year, I can start something completely new, completely different, that I've already got a few ideas brewing that I want to do. I want to do a couple of standalones if I can, rather than go straight into another new series. But we'll see. Just had a question in from Allegra saying, do you have any advice for someone who's just about to start the submission trenches for the first time?
Be really patient. I know this is like, we talk about it all the time, but it's even more true today than it ever was. It's so slow. And I actually read something that I'm not even on submission, but I found this encouraging. I have a friend who has been on submission with 2 different projects in the last year, and she's been very discouraged after both times, after the first like 3 or 4 weeks, about not hearing anything, because it used to be that the earlier you got the interest, the more chances you had of going to auction. But I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. One, because I know personally someone who was on submission for a long time and ended up going to auction with 3 houses. And 2, I read, I can't remember, this was in Publishers Weekly newsletter. It was an editor. I can't remember who it was. I'm sorry. But she was saying, if I'm taking a long time to respond, it does not mean I'm not interested at all. In fact, it's probably the opposite, because we're all overloaded right now. So when I find something really interesting, I need more time with it. I need to sit with it. I need to get more reads on it. So actually taking longer is a good sign for me. And I found, I mean, it's, it's frustrating because when you're on submission, it's just every day drags on and you want to hear something, but really, really try to be patient and not to lose heart. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, and I think that in traditional publishing, the cycles can get a bit longer. So a book, when it goes in, say you've got an agent and it goes straight to editorial, the book would typically come out within a year, but that's quite a short window now these days. I think it could be 12, 15, 18 months from when you sign with a publisher to when the book comes out. And equally, it might be that you've got several months of waiting with to hear back from a literary agent. The other thing I would say is, even in fantasy right now, the idea of standalone with series potential is what's kind of winning in some ways, rather than going in and saying it's a 12-book series and here's book 1. Like, don't do that. So what the other thing you can do is, whilst you're on submission, and I know you wanting to hear what's going on with that project, is start the next thing. Do the next project. Because if an agent comes back and says, this isn't quite right, are you working on anything else? And you go, no, I've been waiting on subs for 2 years. I was just hoping to hear from you. And they're like, oh, okay. But if you're like, oh, I'm working on the next project, I've got some ideas for this, that, and the other, then it's another kind of thing, right? This person is serious. This person is committed. This person understands that having a career as a traditionally published author is not one book. It's many books. The idea of having one book out and you sit on your piles of money like Scrooge McDuck has not been around for decades. So the idea of, you write that book, you send it off, take a break, rest, recharge, start the next project. Because if they say no, but, and you go, I'm 20,000 words into the so-and-so, they might say, oh, when it's done, send me the first draft.
Yeah. And another thing you can do too is just brainstorm multiple ideas, write pitches for like 5 different books that you're excited about and you would maybe want to work on, so that you can show them to your agent and they can maybe help you, because they're going to have a lot of insight into like, this one is going to be really appealing to editors because this is like on trend right now. They might be able to guide you in the right direction so you have a better shot next time. But yeah, just keep working on something.
Yeah. And I had the opposite. So I was getting to the end of one book and I went to my agent and said, I'm thinking of doing an urban fantasy book. And she was like, now's not a good time for these reasons. And she said, have you started writing it? I was like, no. And she's like, well, don't do it. and this, you know, what other ideas have you got? And we talked about those. So there again, it's that thing of you pitch half a dozen ideas and they could say, that sounds good. That probably isn't going to work because of this, this, and this. But it's that thing of start on the next thing, start work on the next thing. And it also, it'll get your mind hopefully off a little bit, off waiting. I mean, you're still going to check your email every 6 seconds, but within those 6 seconds, you can do some writing on the new project.
Yes.
You know? that's my advice anyway. Okay, right. I think we're going to wrap it up there because my voice is starting to go a bit. I haven't coughed yet, so I've managed.
You did an amazing job. I can't believe you made it that long.
To keep sipping lots of gin is working. Okay, right. Well, thank you for everyone for joining us. Thanks for all the questions, and thank you, Michelle, for coming on
thanks
again.
for having me. This was so fun.
It's fun.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, guys. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.